The beauty of podcasting is that you're not limited to one specific platform. You can put your podcast just about anywhere. And at RSS.com, we want to help you do just that. Prepare for maximum coverage. RSS.com's distribution feature is your intergalactic highway to podcast success. With both automatic and guided distribution, your show can be submitted to all of the major podcast directories, including Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube Podcasts, Amazon Music, and more. No need for multiple accounts or complicated processes. Once you're set up, new episodes are automatically distributed, ensuring your episodes reach as many new listeners as possible. Here are the main features. The first is automatic distribution. Easily share your podcast across the top listening apps. Next is auto updates. New episodes are distributed automatically, creating less work for you. And finally, you can start a podcast on YouTube. Easily convert your audio-focused episodes into engaging videos using our PodViz technology. No camera required. Let's take a look at how distribution on RSS.com works. Okay, so I am here in my podcast dashboard for my Podcast Workflows Chats podcast. If I go to the distribution tab, we'll see we have a little checklist. We need a cover image for our podcast. We also need at least one episode published. It needs to be at least 30 seconds long, so it could be a short trailer. And if you are going to upload a trailer, while you can schedule it or publish it immediately, I strongly recommend that you publish it immediately because we want to make sure we get your podcast in all of these directories before you're ready to officially launch. We want people to be able to find your show on day one. So if I go back over to my podcast, I do have an episode drafted already, so I will click publish on that. And now we have added our first podcast episode. If we go back to the distribution tab, we'll see a message that our show is being processed, and once it's done processing, we'll be able to start the submission process. Okay, once your show is processed, we are ready to launch, and you can see that we have a number of platforms we'll automatically submit to. Your show is automatically submitted to the RSS.com community, but we also have automatic submission for Spotify, Apple Music, and crucially, Apple Podcasts. This process has gotten a lot easier. So there are a few ways that you can do automatic submission. You can do it individually. So if I go to Apple Podcasts and click the toggle, we will accept the Apple Podcast terms of service, then click continue. This will process, and then once the show is submitted, it will show as active. Once our show is done processing, it will be active on Apple Podcasts. Now, because this was automatic submission, it's not going to show up in our Apple Podcasts Connect account. We'll have to claim our show. So let's do that really quick before we do the submission for every other show. If we scroll down, we'll see a section for claim our show. And if we go to Apple Podcasts Connect and log in, we can scroll down to more actions and click claim existing show. So we'll claim our existing show by grabbing the Apple Podcast show URL. I have found that the fastest way to do that early on is by going back to our dashboard to my podcast and clicking on public website, because once the show is active, we can get the URL from the listen on Apple Podcasts from the RSS.com podcast website. So I'm going to right click and copy link address, then go back to Podcast Connect, paste in the URL. Our show will show up here. I'll click next, and then we'll be given a token to claim the show. I'll go back to our distribution tab in our RSS.com dashboard, scroll down to claim your show on Apple Podcasts, and paste in the token. Then click claim. The token has successfully been saved. So when we go back to Apple Podcast Connect, it might take some time for it to show up here, but once everything goes through and is processed, your show that you just recently claimed will show up under your shows in Apple Podcast Connect. As for the rest of the automatic submission, we did Apple Podcasts by itself, but we can automatically submit to all of these by clicking submit now and then accepting any of the terms of service that we have to. I'll click continue, and now all of them are processing and will be active in a little bit. For shows that don't offer automatic submission, we do offer guided distribution, where we give you as easy to follow guides as possible to submit your shows to those directories. So for any of those directories, you would click on one and then you would get step-by-step instructions. So if we want to submit our show to Deezer, we would click copy RSS feed, then submit your show to Deezer. And then I'll click publish my podcast, paste in the RSS feed, click next, and then we'll put in some information here. We'll accept the terms and conditions and click submit. And now we get an address for Deezer. So we'll copy that, go back over to our distribution tab and paste in the Deezer URL and click save changes. So you can do that for all of the guided distribution directories. The last thing we want to talk about is how to get our show on YouTube using RSS.com's PodViz technology. So let's do that now. Over on the distribution tab, if you scroll to the bottom, you can, under the YouTube logo, click activate to convert audio episodes into videos. So I'll click activate, and then we'll sign in with Google. Once we do that, we will allow PodViz by RSS.com to access our Google account, and then we will be able to publish our episodes to YouTube. So we can optionally choose a playlist. So if you want to create a playlist for your podcast, which YouTube does recommend, you can do that and it'll show up in this list. We'll set the visibility to public. Then you want to choose the audience if it is or is not made for kids. Unless it is specifically made for kids, you need to select no, it's not made for kids. So we're all set here. If we go back to our podcast dashboard now, we'll be able to click the create video and publish on YouTube button for our episodes. And then we'll click publish episode. That will process and get published over on YouTube in a few minutes. Once the video is done processing, it'll show up on your YouTube channel and it will look something like this. So if we pick one of these episodes, you'll see that we have the podcast artwork and waveform. If your show has custom chapters or chapter artwork, that will also show up in this video. Expand your podcast's reach effortlessly. Our podcast distribution is designed to maximize your show's visibility across the podosphere. Whether your listeners prefer to tune in via their favorite app or discover new shows through directory searches, RSS.com ensures your podcast is ready to be discovered by new followers and fans.